There's been a lot happening with different types of imaging technologies like 360 cameras, as well as a lot happening with generative AI. And so when I saw the potential for kind of interactive exploration of a generated AI image, I thought that would be a pretty interesting thing to share. So I worked through some of the ways to do this, and I want to share the workflow. What we're seeing on the screen now is an image generated in Midjourney and posted on YouTube that is interactive. And then it allows me to zoom in, although the quality isn't great on YouTube because it only allows for 4K, but just through, I've basically paused a video and it allows you to interact with it like this in 3D. So what I'll do is I'll walk you through exactly how to do this from Midjourney and tweak it in Photoshop, and then convert it to a video, and then be able to post it on YouTube. So let's take a look at what we have. I'm going to first go to Midjourney, and I saw someone post this very simple prompt, and I tweaked it a little bit. It produced a couple of issues, and I figured out how to solve those. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an equi-rectangular photograph, and this is basically an unrolled panoramic photograph that you would see as a 3D image, or as a 360 image, sorry. And prompt this, and so I'm just going to cut and paste this prompt that I had before. We're going to do this simply with Imagine. And then in the prompt, let's start with, we can start with something very simple. And so here's basically the prompt that you're going to need, which is equi-rectangular photograph. Let's give it something. Then there's a couple of post prompts with that. The aspect ratio for this is 2:1 in a landscape format. We can use the tile parameter, which allows this image to wrap around as a kind of cylinder. It doesn't always work, and so we can tweak this a little bit, and then style raw, stylize are kind of standard. You can change those. And then we're going to do this in version 6. So let's start with something simpler. Let's say use that photo, and let's just say limestone quarry. And so we'll get an image of a limestone quarry, something that we're probably used to seeing if we Googled for an image like that, for a 360 image. But then what I would suggest doing is adding to it, tweaking that, playing with what results. So here we can see the 4 variations that result from that prompt. We can choose to upscale one of them. They're all kind of interesting. I might do this top left image, and just because there's some foreground, there's some reflections, and then there's some deeper space there. Although I also like this image down on the bottom left. So let's upscale this one, and then we can save it. So we can see this. There's a little bit of watermark. There's a couple of other things going on here, but I'll right click and I'll save this image. It's just going to save to my downloads. And while I'm in Midjourney, let's take a look at trying something a little more complicated. We'll again Imagine, and we'll use something like we did, like I had before, that I tested before I started recording. So we're going to do the equi-rectangular photograph, comma, And then I'm going to give it, here I'm looking for an abandoned industrial building, comma, reclaimed by nature within a limestone quarry. But let's mix it up. We can do this at night, during the winter, with snow, ice, rust, and patina. And then otherwise, the post prompts, or the prompts that we see at the end, or the parameters, I guess, of the prompt, will stay the same. So let's see what happens with this. So here's our resulting 4 variations. I like the top left one just because we get a difference in the color range across that. I'm going to upscale it, and I'm also just going to do this once more, and that way we can look at a couple of differences between things. I'll save this image. And let me rerun it, and we'll see what happens with another 4. So as a comparison, where we upscaled this previous image that was more interior, we have a couple of options here that are more exterior. And I wanted to do this, let me see, well, there's a couple of really nice images here. Let me take the top left image, and I want to also use this because there's a couple of issues with it, but even when this happens, it's pretty easy to fix within Photoshop. So I'm going to upscale number 1, and now this gives us 3 images to work with in a couple of different ways, and we can take them into Photoshop now. So I also grabbed a grid, a kind of perspectival grid that relates to the to this type of 360 image. So let me open my 3 images that we just generated. This was one. That was one, and that was one. So I'll open all 3 of these. And again, remember it was a 2-to-1 ratio. So we have that directly out of Midjourney. These images are 1536 by 768. Now, it's a little small, and so we can do a couple of things. You can increase the image size here by resampling. You can use an AI tool to upscale those even larger. There's a couple of great examples. And actually, before I start playing with these in Photoshop, let's look at them using this other tool, which is a nice test to look at these things. So, and I can put a couple of links at the bottom of the video. And we can see here a previous test that I had. This is a nice way. We just simply upload an image. I was playing with text in Photoshop to see how that worked. So let's take a look at just the native image that we get out of Midjourney. So this, let's start with our first one from the quarry. We can zoom out. This was my previous image. Let's look at the image that we just created. It's this one. And this tool is nice because we can just simply upload an image directly from our downloads. It gives us a chance. I can maximize the screen, zoom out, and then we can orbit around. And I picked this one because it was nice. It had some reflections in the foreground, but we can see the image is pretty grainy. And this is because it's 1500 pixels wide. We also have a sense here, something that we're going to fix, which is a seam. Even though the image is tiled, it doesn't always do it perfectly. So I'm going to escape. Let's take a look at our other the other two images that we created at this first resolution. Here was our second image. We can maximize the view, zoom out, and just get a sense as we look up and down and around. Does it tile well together? It's a little abrupt, probably about this seam where these train tracks are coming in, and this one may be a difficult thing to fix. But here we get natural light from above, and then maybe some artificial light at the end of that tunnel. Take a look at the third image, and this was the one that actually has a couple of issues with it, where we can see a kind of black bar at the top and bottom. We'll maximize the view and zoom out. It's not terrible, but we can see that that black bar across the top just gives us this kind of black hole above, and it'll do the same down below, down here. But we can use generative fill, and we can fix that easily. This might be the seam here, and we can look at how to soften that. But again, the resolution's not great. So let's do a couple of things. First, there are ways to upscale. The one that I'm going to use is, I've been playing with Stable Diffusion and using Comfy UI to do this. And we can look at an upscale version here, and I can just show a comparison. I will pre-do these and let these run, and I'll pause and then I'll come back after they're done. But basically let this go through the process of upscaling, and so it actually adds some detail, and we'll look at them and compare them in Photoshop so we can see before and after. So I just completed the third upscale. We can see that we get a lot more detail in here. I'm doing this because there are other AI applications. You have to pay a membership in order to do this type of upscale with Stable Diffusion. I can do this free. I'll probably do some other tutorials for Stable Diffusion in the future. Let's look at the difference now in Photoshop, and then we'll come back and look at the difference in this 3D player. So we can see here. Let me open the three that I just created. Here they are, and we can do a quick comparison just in terms of their resolution and the detail. And we can tweak a couple things, and I'll show you one way to look at an easy way to tile. So in this image that we've upscaled, this is going to be now 6,000 pixels wide. And if we just look at, here's the first one. This is at 100% here, and this is at, oh, too big, still scrolling. Here, I'll just set it. This is at 100%. And so we can see there's a lot of detail that gets added within there. Let's just drop this into the player at its full size, and we should be able to see a quality difference. If we want to take this all the way to YouTube, we will have to drop the resolution because the maximum that's allowed with YouTube is 4K. Here's our image as we go around. Again, we have a little bit of a tiling issue here. not bad. We look down, we look up, we get a sense for those things. So back to Photoshop now to tweak a couple of things. What we want to do is first of all set our resolution. And so for YouTube, this is going to be 4096, which is 4K, and it's 2:1 aspect ratio. And so here's what we have. Let's clean up a couple of other things while we're here. There's a couple of watermarks, top and bottom. I'm just going to do this with the generative fill. I don't even need a prompt. So those watermarks in the corners I just took care of. But here's how we look at the tiling. What we're going to do is we're going to go to Filter, Other, and Offset. And what we can do is offset horizontally within the image frame. And what was over here, or this seam here, was at the edge. When it's at the edge, it's really difficult to understand exactly how it matches up. We can change this just based on the pixels. If we want to do 1000, we can move this over. Now we see that the whole image has kind of slid around, and now here's where our seam is. Say OK, and I can just often just look at using generative fill, maybe even just through that whole zone. Really what I'm trying to do is just ease that kind of discontinuity where that seam existed. As we toggle between the three, maybe the third one here, we start to get some lines that carry through, and it starts to fix that. I'm just going to flatten this whole image down. I'll save it, and then we can open it in that viewer. So now as we come back to the viewer, let's upload the new image. We'll see if we took care of a couple of those things. So we dropped the resolution slightly. We got rid of any watermarks that were at the top and bottom. And this is where that seam was earlier. There's still a little bit of change in color, but seems pretty smooth as we move across there. So let me show you just a couple of other things while I'm here with this viewer. While I'm not going to do it within this tutorial, I was recently playing with some text and trying to lay some text into the images. And that's something that can be done in Photoshop. It's a little, well, it's not that tricky. I can show you how to do it, but it needs to be distorted given the distortion that we see in the 360 image. So we can get out of this, and we'll just go back to Photoshop once more, and this is the kind of map for looking at how to begin to embed text in there, that you have to distort the text based on the perspectival lines that have to do with that projection. As we do that, let's just look at this image as one example. Here's our upscaled version. I'll quickly use the generative fill again to fix these. So I used the generative fill to fill in the black border that was on the top and the bottom. I did these at the full resolution of the upscaled image. I can now reduce the image size, and again 4K is 4096 by 2048. And I want to shift the image, but before I do, I can also use one of these templates that I grabbed from online and overlay it onto the image. I've got it set to 4096. I can change the opacity so I can start to get a little bit of a sense for how this might be working in different ways. If I wanted to add some text, those are the ways that we would distort the text depending on where it sits within the image. If for any reason we wanted to shift, if your image doesn't line up, you can offset horizontally left and right in order to get, right, I think we're seeing this building curving here, this curving here. And so at least generally these seem to be working. Just shift it a little bit more. I pressed enter, I shouldn't have done that. We'll just offset a little bit more. What I'm looking at is this edge of the building in relationship to this curve within the grid. And so that looks okay. I can keep that like that. But then the other thing that I want to do, and I can get rid of that overlay now. If I wanted to lay in text, I could do that. I'm going to hide that or delete that. And what I want to do is offset this image to make sure that my two edges match up. And so if I wanted to keep the overlay there, I would just use the same dimension in order to offset and say, okay. We can see that we've got a pretty harsh seam through the middle here. So I'm just going to grab enough on either side, maybe through here, use generative fill. I also don't love the spotlight or moon or whatever that is in the background, and so I'm also going to take care of that. We're really just trying to find a way to get a kind of seamlessness across that, so that we don't have a seam there. So with a little bit of that fixed up, trying to blend that seam, I flatten the image. I just want to double check the image size. So that's 4K, 4096. Two more steps in order to getting this to move into a YouTube interactive video. So let's save this. Now that that's saved, I'm going to close it. Before I do one more thing, I just want to try it within this easy viewer. We can see it does now come in as the kind of center of the image. So if we felt that we didn't solve this seam perfectly, which I don't think that we did here, we could always offset the image back so that our starting view is where we want it. But we'll pan around. Generally, this seems to be working. Oh. Resolution looks okay. We can see some detail on the wall here. We can see other things happening. I don't love that seam, and so this would be one place maybe where I would re-offset the image after I deal with the seam, so that that's not the first thing I see when I open the file. But we can also see if we look down, we fix those black bars that would have originally resulted in a black circle here. If we look up, the sky's also been fixed because that black band would have been up there. Okay, so this is a great way. This viewer has a ton of information here. Again, I'm including this link at the bottom. It's worth checking that out. There are ways to embed this viewer. There are ways to embed it at a higher resolution, but YouTube is a really nice way to work with that. So we have to do two more things in order to take this to YouTube. First is you have to use a video tool, and I'm using Camtasia to create the tutorials. Camtasia is an easy thing for me to use. What we would do is simply get the image. You can do this with any video editing software. I want to bring the image in, and you can set it to something like a 20-second video. I don't know that the length really matters that much, because once you have it in YouTube, you can pause the video anyway. We do want to set here, I would produce more black bars here. I want to set the project settings to the resolution here being custom. Then I would be 4096 by 2048. I would then set my image to that so that my output is 4K. And now I'll simply export this as an MP4. So now I've got that image saved as a 20-second MP4 video. The last thing that I want to do is to open this little tool, which I will include this link on where to find it. It's a metadata injector. So what we simply do is open our file. So this is the one that I just created, Industrial Building MP4. We open it. We want to click My Video is Spherical. Again, 360 video. We can inject metadata, and we can then save it. That's all we had to do. Now we can go to YouTube and we can upload this video. And so this last step, we're not going to go through how to load the video into YouTube, but we can see that it creates a new file, Industrial Building Injected, with that metadata, and then you upload it to YouTube. If you pause the video, you can look around interactively from a desktop. If you go to that video with an iPad or a phone, you can use the gyroscope, and as you move around, it's more like augmented reality. And the other cool thing is that we can also set this for use with VR goggles, so that as you move your head, you can navigate and move around in that space. So it's a number of steps. I'm sure this process will get easier, but the thing that was really exciting for me is that we can begin putting generative AI images out into the world that become more interactive and usable in different ways. So if you have any questions, feel free to post a question and subscribe to this channel, as I'll be loading more of these videos and more tutorials as a way to work through these things. Thanks for listening.